Today we will study about carbohydrates. Here is the checklist for a lecture. What are carbohydrates including some introduction? Then I will tell you the structure, classification and functions of carbohydrates. So let's start with introduction first. Did you know that carbohydrates are composed of two words? One is carbo and the other is hydrate. Carbo means carbon and hydrate means water. So its general formula is H2O. You might be thinking why? Because carbon is C and HUO is water. So its general formula can also be H2O. Some examples of carbohydrates include triose, tetrose, glucose, maltose, sucrose, starch, cellulose, glycogen. Triose is a 3-carbon sugar and its formula is C3H6O3. As for tetrose, which is a 4-carbon sugar, and glucose is a 6-carbon sugar. Carbohydrates can be simple or complex. If they are simple, their examples include triose, tetrose, glucose. If we talk about complex carbohydrates, their examples include starch, glycogen, and cellulose. Carbohydrates are found in all living organisms in the world. Did you know that carbohydrates are an energy source? We need to consume them for energy. They are present in humans, animals, plants, and even in fungi. Now, let's move on to the classification of carbohydrates. Let me tell you first that the word carbohydrate is actually taken from a Greek word. Saccharide is taken from saccharin, and saccharin means sugar. That is why we call carbohydrates sugars. We've classified them into 4 categories. Let's go through each classification one by one. The first is monosaccharide. It is made up of 2 words. Mono means one, and saccharide means sugar. A single sugar molecule is called a monosaccharide. Their examples include triose, tetrose, pentose, hexose, and more. Now, let's move on to the second classification, disaccharide. It is also made up of 2 words. D means 2 and saccharide is taken from sugar, which means 2 sugar molecules. When 2 monosaccharides combine, we get a disaccharide. The third classification we have is oligosaccharide. It is also made up of 2 words. Oligo means few and saccharide means sugar. Few sugars, carbohydrates. Now, you might be thinking how many are counted as few. Let me clarify below. As I have already said, mono means 1, D means 2. So, an oligo means 2 10 sugar molecules come together to form oligosaccharides. The last classification is polysaccharide. It is made up of 2 words. Poly means many, a saccharide means sugar. When many sugar molecules combine, we call it polysaccharide. And here many mean more than 10 sugars, because 2 to 10 sugar molecules are included in oligosaccharides. Let's move forward to study them one by one in detail. Number 1. Monosaccharides. Monosaccharides are the simplest form of sugars. Monosaccharides are simple and soluble in water. They are sweet in taste, with the sweetest among them being monosaccharides. Since they are simple, they can't be broken down much further, nor can they be hydrolyzed any further. Talking about examples. All the examples of monosaccharides apply here because monosaccharides are single sugar molecules. I've mentioned this earlier. These molecules contain 3 to 7 carbon atoms. If there are 3 carbon atoms, it's called triose. If there are 4, it's tetrose. If there are 6, it's hexose. In the hexose group, we have glucose, which is a sugar found in grapes. Another one is fructose, which is a monosaccharide found in honey. The third one is galactose, which is found in milk. Now, let's move on to the second classification, disaccharides. They are made up of two words. D means two, a saccharide means sugar. Two sugar molecules combine to form a disaccharide. Examples of disaccharides include previously we studied monosaccharides like glucose, fructose, and galactose. When two monosaccharides combine, they form disaccharides. For example, glucose and glucose combine to form maltose, glucose and fructose combine to form sucrose, and glucose and galactose combine to form maltose. So, maltose, sucrose, and lactose are examples of disaccharides. Maltose can be found in burgers, chocolates, and pizzas. If we talk about sucrose, it's found in sugarcane and grapes. And if we talk about lactose, it's found in milk. Now, let's move on to the third classification of carbohydrates, which is oligosaccharides. I've already explained that oligosaccharides are composed of few sugar molecules. When 2 to 10 sugar molecules combine, they form oligosaccharides. Disaccharides fall under oligosaccharides because disaccharides consist of two sugar molecules and oligosaccharides contain 2 to 10 sugar molecules. Now let's move on to the final classification of carbohydrates. Polysaccharides. It is made up of two words. Poly means many and a saccharide means sugar. In this classification, we find many sugar molecules. How many? I've already mentioned that more than 10 sugar molecules combine to form polysaccharides. In this classification, the sugar molecules are attached to one another. We have further subdivided polysaccharides into different types. If we talk about polysaccharides, they are complex, which is why they are insoluble in water. However, simple sugars such as monosaccharides are soluble in water. I've mentioned that since these are insoluble, it's because they are complex. Since they are complex, we can break them down further into simpler sugars. Now, talking about examples, there are three main examples. The first one is starch, the second one is glycogen, and the third one is cellulose. Let's study each classification of polysaccharides one by one. First, we come to starch. In starch, the glucose molecules are attached to each other in a straight chain. In a straight chain, in a linear form, glucose molecules or monomers are attached to one another, which forms starch. Starch is actually a reserve food for plants, meaning that plants store extra food so they can use it during tough times, as they don't perform photosynthesis all the time. Starch is found in leaves, seeds, and roots. If I give examples such as rice, potatoes, and corn, these are all reserve foods stored by plants. Now, moving on to the second classification, glycogen. Just as starch is a reserve food for plants, similarly, glycogen is a reserve food for animals. That's why we call it animal starch. Of course, animals don't eat all the time. So, when they don't eat, they still need energy. Did you know where this energy came from? It comes from this reserve food. And where do animals store this reserve food? They store it in their liver and muscles. When glycogen is stored and we need energy. Did you know that when we are not eating or during fasting, where does the energy come from? The energy comes from the glycogen stored in muscles or the liver. And there's a mechanism for this which I will explain in detail later. But for now, let me tell you that when glucose in our body decreases, our brain sends a signal to the pancreas to release certain hormones, which are insulin and glucagon. These hormones regulate blood sugar levels by storing extra glucose in muscles or releasing it into the blood during tough times when energy is needed. Now, let's move on to the final classification of polysaccharides, cellulose. I have already mentioned cellulose in the previous chapter, but I'll explain it again. Cellulose is present in plants. Where is it found? It is the main component of plant cells, the main component of the cell wall. What is a cell wall? The outer boundary of a plant cell is called the cell wall. The outer boundary of plants is made up of cellulose. If you want to read more about this, refer to my lecture on cells, where I have explained in detail about the outer boundary and how it is formed. Remember one thing, note this down. It's important. Animals consume cellulose, but they cannot digest it. That's why there are certain bacteria in our stomach to help digest cellulose. If these bacteria weren't there, we as animals would not be able to digest cellulose. Now, let's move on to the functions of carbohydrates. The first function of carbohydrates is that they produce energy. Carbohydrates allow us to work all the time. If carbohydrates didn't exist, we wouldn't be able to function. The second function is that they store food as a reserve. We don't eat all the time. Sometimes we fast, or we eat 2 or 3 times a day. So where does the food come from? It comes from this reserve food in the form of starch in plants and glycogen in animals. It is stored and then used. The third function is structural composition. Carbohydrates also help in structure, like cellulose, which I've already explained as the main component of the cell wall. Question of the day: what is the most common monosaccharide? If you know the answer, you can comment below.